Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, clean your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, and relax while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, at the time of our last program, they had yet to announce whether the suspected bomber was an Islamist terrorist. However, I said that there was enough circumstantial evidence, and we've seen enough from history to know that it would most likely be an Islamofascist terrorist. That just seems to go with logic because it's something that we've seen repeat itself over and over again with respect to these sorts of attacks. It always seemingly comes down to an Islamofascist who loathes and despises the United States of America and is willing to go out and do anything to bring harm or death to America. Recall that that's one of the chants that they always like to do is death to America. They hate us. They hate Western philosophy, civilization, and our sophistication because in a real sense, what they are trying to do and to push forward is this twisted machination that just relates to a barbaric and medieval ideology. That's literally what these people want to push forward, and it's just incongruous with who we are, both as a nation and as a people. But recall that they just hadn't said anything at the time. And of course, I said it was okay to show some restraint or some caution with respect to that because it's not good to go out half-cocked, so to say, because it would spread pandemonium and cause further confusion to the American public, and that's something that we shouldn't just outright seek to engage in or seek to be a part of what we do or how we respond to these sorts of situations. But what it really shows is that once it comes to the light, they are then playing catch up in a sense. The leadership is playing catch up. They're trying to again rein it in and restore some credibility because they come off at times as looking like buffoons. Recall that New York Governor Cuomo sat there and said that yes, it's terrorism, but it wasn't this new sort of politically correct term that they have for it now, international terror, as Bernie Sanders had said, or what most of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists say in regards to these sorts of things. And it's bizarre to see that that's how they go about discussing these things. It's bizarre to see that that's how they think they can convince us that it's something other than what it really is. And that's what they do. They obfuscate the truth. It's not about going forth and being open and honest with the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. It's about obfuscating the truth to push forward a certain narrative. But anyway, de Blasio went so far as to claim that they had no evidence linking it to Islamofascism at the time, and of course he just said it was an intentional incident, as if it's going out and encountering somebody in the park. That would be an intentional incident. But this was a bombing. This was an attack. It was designed to spread terror. It was designed to spread carnage and to be destructive. And it really did show all of the hallmarks of Islamofascist terrorism at the time. And what we know is now that there can be no question as to the motives of the bomber. The little jihadi is one Ahmed Khan Rami. He's a 28-year-old U.S. citizen who was born in Afghanistan back on January 23rd, 1988. So here we are again. What was he? A refugee? Was he somebody that we just brought over? Was it somebody who was quote unquote radicalized during his time over here? Because it seems at least from what little the reports have shown, that he has always been an American except for being born over there, or at least that he spent a great amount of time or a great deal of time in the United States. And it shows that these people don't want to assimilate. And when they don't want to assimilate, it's that they want to hold on to their line of thought, their society, their philosophical background and upbringing, and not to basically become a part of the United States. They don't want to become a part of this culture. And so they create this separate clique group that serves as kind of an outside group. It's a niche of them, and they create their own society just so that they don't have to assimilate into the United States. And that's where you start to have the barriers break down. That's where you start, or have barriers brought up, rather. It's that you have these people who are not wanting to become a part of the overarching culture, and so it creates this sense of us versus them. That's what they do. They are like a clique. That's exactly what they are. And when they play to that, it goes to the great detriment of us, because that is where you can start fostering those sorts of Islamofascist leanings and can be influenced by the Islamofascist state of ISIS. And what they really want to do, folks, is create this global caliphate. They want to essentially turn the entire globe into their version of Islam. But that doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense, really, when you think of things in the grand scheme of things. But what we know is, like Saeed Farouk, the one who did the San Bernardino terrorist shooting along with his wife Tashin Malik back in December or November of 2015, Romney is a citizen of the United States. This stresses a significant discussion point that is being ignored by Obama with respect to the Syrian resettlement program. While Rami is of Afghan descent, it doesn't change the fact that he is an adherent of the Islamic faith. And you see, that's one of the things that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists get hung up on with respect to the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. It's that they don't want to ascribe the characteristics that really do put America at risk, because they're engaging in identity politics. They're engaging at pointing the finger of blame at the United States of America first. And of course, it's an intellectually disingenuous position that they take, and it's one that I think really places us at significant risk of harm. But again, even though he's an Afghani, he's Islamic. Not all of the terrorists that attack the United States are Afghans. They have been Saudis before. They've been Syrians before too. And so that is something that we have to be concerned about, particularly when you know that Russia and Syria are running around now saying that the United States of America has aided ISIS by, having an airstrike against, I believe they claim the number is 26 Syrian soldiers. But again, because it's a Russian source, I'm not so sure as to how trustworthy that information can be. And again, it highlights the difficulties that we're facing in our foreign policy and in our international relations. And this disastrous 2016 presidential election cycle is certainly not giving us reason for hope with respect to that. But anyway, it all ties in that it should be telling that even without having seen the evidence, my first, and in fact the only logical conclusion, was to assume that it was related to the entire issue of Islamofascism, that being the attacks in New York and New Jersey. And the reason that this was an easy conclusion to arrive at is because it ties in with the political aspect of Islam. In many ways, politics and religion are inexorably linked, but with the wide array of factions within Islam, there is this tie to politicking that is not there so much to as great of an extent with other religions like Christianity or Judaism. But in some ways, you cannot separate religion from politics. Because in Western civilization, the political influence of the Catholic Church and then later the Protestant movement significantly shaped our views on culture, education, and even self identity. You see, it's by being able to identify ourselves that we are able to move forth in the world and engage with things. But again, our sense of identity has been shaped by the Judeo-Christian principles and ethics that have for centuries been the bedrock foundation of Western society and civilization. But that's not what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists want you to think about, because they don't like this traditional understanding of self, because it is diametrically opposed to the sort of system that they're wanting to impose upon us. In other words, what they are seeking to do is to force us into a collectivist system that is in conflict with our traditional societal mores and values. And see, if they can redefine that, if they can pervert that, or if they can cause that to collapse, then they can go about more efficiently bringing about their dark and twisted machinations on the rest of us. And so they will adhere to that, marching to it lockstep almost. And again, as the Islamofascists will never divorce themselves from religion, and they try to place that aspect, the religiosity of them, in every facet of their lives, so too do the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists attempt to, just inject their political ideology and philosophy into everything that they do. And they refuse to disassociate from it. They refuse to divorce themselves from it, because ultimately it is a religion for them. They worship at the altar of the almighty state. And of course, when you think about that in an objective fashion, it comes about as showing what their goals are. And it explains how their goals do not actually correlate with or line up with our values and traditions, which, as we have so oftentimes stated here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is found in the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. You see, that being the supreme law of the land and based on those natural law tenets, ties directly into this notion of self-identity, or the notion and understanding of self, which the adherents of political correctness seek to attack. And the way that they go about attacking it, folks, is that they implement moral relativism to shift blame away from those who perpetrate the sorts of attacks that we have borne witness to there in New York and in New Jersey. In the end, though, it doesn't change the nature of those who advocate a barbaric worldview. Islamic nations do not believe in the inherent value of the individual. They follow a collectivist system. It's about them identifying in a form of tribalism, but that is based on their religious ideologies and practices. That in and of itself is diametrically opposed to the way that the United States operates. It goes against the grain of the foundational image that our founding fathers dreamed of at the inception of this nation some 235 plus years ago. And so we have to be cognizant of this fact and aware of the danger that it does present to us, because it is, when you examine the totality of the circumstances, a major point of contention that the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are not addressing. It goes to an overarching, undeniable pattern that always seems to come to the surface with respect to these sorts of incidents, because again, it is what they do. It is what they advocate for, it's what they practice, it's what they believe, and it's an inherent pillar of how they identify themselves. And it goes back to that point that I was making earlier of how they just separate themselves and isolate themselves into these little cliques in which they don't associate with other Americans and they don't assimilate into American society. This is why you see those bizarre things such as honor killings and all of those other barbaric practices which are diametrically opposed to our natural law tenets, in which we value and revere human dignity and decency through individualism. But Islamic nations do try and push Sharia law. And that's been a point of contention here in the United States. There's been this just rabid push to try and get our judiciary to adopt Sharia law. But as we pointed out in an episode that we dedicated directly to how Sharia law was and is incompatible with the natural law of the United States, this is not something that we can allowed to come to fruition because it is so drastically different, because it clashes with all of the things that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. But again, it's the point of contention that we find ourselves divided over this because of those notions of politicalism, trying to equate our society and civilization with their dark and twisted machinations. But again, Sharia law is based on a caste system, as opposed to the rights of sovereign individuals. It's for this reason, above all else, that we can say that such a system is completely incompatible with our culture and our system of polity. The left, however, refuses to acknowledge this, whereas people like Saeed Farouk and Ahmed Rami have proactively, openly declared war upon Western civilization and society. You see, they don't have the qualms that we do about going forth and proclaiming what their intentions are. It's we who have been blinded by these poison pills of political correctness and moral relativism and seeking to go out and not offend someone and just being petrified by the thought of offending someone that brings this sort of insanity to our shores. Because we are essentially sticking our heads in the sands like a bunch of ostriches, which is not the way that you can proactively, efficiently, and successfully address these sorts of problems. And yes, folks, this is a problem. It's metastasizing in the body politic of the United States, and we can ill afford to allow that to happen, because when it does happen, that pushes us closer to the brink of anarchy, chaos, and ultimately destruction. But where does it go from here? Well, of course, the position of the Obama regime will be to chastise the American people. That's what they've always done in the brink of these terrorist attacks. It's not that they want to ascribe the responsibility to those who have admitted to engaging in this and who have purposefully tried to attack the United States of America. No, because to them, that would prove that a collectivist system doesn't work. And recall that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are hell-bent on trying to force us into a collectivist mindset, much like how Sharia law works, much like how the Islamofascist mindset works. And I think that's why they can align with each other. It's because even though on the surface it would appear that the Islamofascists don't represent anything that the left desires because they are hyper religious. You want to talk about a real war on women? Look at how women are treated in Islamic countries and the way that they are given even less than second class citizenship or status in Sharia law. But because of this collectivist mindset, almost like a hive of insects, the left finds a natural ally, at least for a time, within the Islamofascist movement. And so they want to try and go and use this tool of identity politics to bludgeon us with it so that we are just polarized in the court of public opinion and painted off as being the radical weirdos, the ones that aren't really in touch or in tune with reality, and the ones that should be ostracized. But this position that I speak of here is Obama's default position on these issues. Recall that Obama, like the Islamofascists, speaks of atrocities that occurred during the Crusades. In fact, I've even got a soundbite that I'm going to cue up now, folks, to remind you and jog your memory of what it was that he said and how it's not connected with reality, but it's a danger that we keep facing. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull that up now. So here we go.
How do we, as people of faith, reconcile these realities? The profound good, the strength, the tenacity, the compassion and love that can flow from all of our faiths, operating alongside those who seek to hijack religious for their own murderous ends. Humanity's been grappling with these questions throughout human history. And lest we get on our high horse and think this is unique to some other place, remember that during the Crusades and the Inquisition, people committed terrible deeds in the name of Christ. In our home country, slavery and Jim Crow all too often was justified in the name of Christ.
So you see, that's the bunch of drivel that he does. He engages in moral relativism there and political correctness because he's trying to compare this to what people like Rami and others do. And so what he wants to do is make that the moral equivalent to Christianity so that it's tied into their favorite pet target. But it's an intellectually disingenuous position to assume because, first of all, it's not fact-based. I don't recall the last time Christians ran around flying planes into buildings, killing 3,000 innocent individuals. Those were people who claimed to be active practitioners of Islam. And in fact, they claimed to do it in the name of Islam. And the Islamic State claims that all of the atrocities and all of these attacks that they have engaged in, all of that barbarism, they are doing in the name of Islam and to create an Islamic theocracy throughout the world. That is what the caliphate is. They want to create an Islamic-dominated world. But what Obama does is compare Rami and all of the other terrorists to things that happened nearly 1,000 years ago. Folks, the Crusades have been in the annals of history for a long time. No one is alive today that fought in the Crusades. 1099, in which was one of the years of the First Crusade, is certainly not a period of living memory. Back then, we were in the medieval period. But that's where these sects, such as ISIS and those who adhere to their barbaric principles and ideologies, would want the world to be, again, That's where they want to take the world again. That's where they want to push us. And it's, again, intellectually disingenuous on the part of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists to try and marginalize the fact of what their wicked intent is. It's attempting to obfuscate the truth, to discombobulate the American people, and to lead us down a path that makes no sense whatsoever. But that is what they do. They use moral relativism and political correctness in tandem to silence people. And yet, at the same time, people like Obama ignore the atrocities that were carried out in the name of Islam during those very same crusades. So already they're giving a biased approach to it, and they're not being forthright with respect to what it is that they are saying and doing and advocating for. And that, too, is a disingenuous position. And let's actually help pull away some of this veneer of political correctness that has been deluding us and basically distracting us for far too long now. It's at this point that we need to recall one of the nicknames for Muhammad. He was known as the prophet of the sword. Tabari, who was an early Muslim historian and lived from 839 to 923 AD, mentions that Muhammad had nicknames for the 3 swords he stole from the Jewish population he banished from Medina in April of the year 624. And the names are not very original, but it speaks volumes about the mindset or the frame of mind of this murderous prophet. Pluck out, very sharp, and death. Those were the names given to the swords. And so what you see is they are about plucking out societies that already exist, cutting them with a very sharp blade, and ultimately worshiping death. That is their trinity. And that speaks volumes as to what it is that they are seeking to bring about in this nation. And we can ill afford to allow that to happen, because when you stop and think about it, if that is the ideology that they espouse, then it is not one in which we follow the fundamental tenets here of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No, theirs is pluck out, cutting with a sharp blade, and death. That is an unholy trinity if I've ever heard of one. And again, it shows that they do not want to assimilate because they simply wish to continue to advocate these sorts of dark, twisted, and maniacal positions to force us to submit. Because recall what Islam means in ancient Arabic. It means to completely debase yourself and submit to the will of Allah. And so it's a collectivist mentality again. It's tribal. And so they will find natural allies in the rank and file of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, and indeed in the so-called alternative or alt-right, or as I prefer to refer to them, the alt-right. You see, folks, if we don't pay attention to these things, and if we refuse to connect the dots that should be clear and open and obvious to everyone who even has a modicum of intellectual genuineness or genuineness here, it's that they push us to be divided, to weaken us, to replace us, to change who we are. But folks, there can be no question that there is a legacy of violence surrounding the Prophet of Islam. Those who carry out these dastardly attacks are seeking to establish a fundamentalist caliphate based on the most draconian aspects of their faith, because they seek the implementation of Islamic or Sharia law. They seek to dominate the United States, thereby fundamentally transforming it into a theocracy. But recall that this violates the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which says Congress shall make no law establishing an American religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. But when you encroach upon the rights of your fellow citizen and your fellow popular sovereign, that is when you are no longer merely practicing a religion. That is when you are engaging in something that is not protected by the First Amendment. And we have to be cognizant of that and aware of that and literally stand up for what is right. And that's what the problem is now. We just have no sense of right and wrong. Folks, one of the things that we have to keep in mind here is that national security is hamstrung when we refuse to admit the dangers we face. And that's why it's so baffling to me that we wouldn't pay attention to the sorts of dangers that are being posed here, and that we are essentially sticking our heads in the sand instead of properly discussing and analyzing what it is that's threatening us. Because when we do that, it really does not work in our best interest. It exposes us to a continued danger, and it emboldens these people to keep pushing to attack us. And think of this. Imagine if we had operated from a perspective of political correctness and moral relativism during the American War of Independence. We'd never achieve success. We would still be a colony of Great Britain, because we would not be able to discern or discover or to even believe in the righteousness of our cause, because there would be no right and wrong. It would be okay to oppress because that is their view set, and we can't laud that over people. And it would just be wrong to try and stand up for your own self-benefit, but your own self-identity or anything like that, because that would be offensive. You see, that's what it comes down to. They try and dilute the real issues to engage in these penultimate concerns that ultimately harm us. It weakens us. It draws us away from what matters and what is significant and what we should pay attention to, and instead draws us along the path of bread and circuses. Now, I get that from the waning days of the Roman Empire, when the people were starving. So the way that the emperor decided to deal with the collapsing conditions and the deplorable problems that were afflicting all of Rome was to distract people with free events, free entertainment with free bread at the Colosseum. That's where the term bread and circuses comes from. And it's sort of what we see here with moral relativism and political correctness. Because when you have the Islamofascists attacking us, the first thing that these frothing at the mouth leftists do is they run out in ADD fashion and say, oh, there's an attack, oh, squirrel, and then try and run away. But it doesn't translate to solving the problems that face us. And that's one of the things that we're dedicated to here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. It's to try and solve these problems that are facing us, both as a nation and as a people, and to do it in a practicable, real-world way that is compliant with the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution, and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights as well. And, I think one of the most poignant examples of moral relativism that we can point to, particularly when we're thinking about this just horrific set of terrorist attacks and the slew of terrorist attacks that we've suffered under the disastrous second term of the Barack Hussein Obama regime, is this old adage that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. It's attempting to erroneously link disparate views and equalize the justness or rightness of both competing factions. That's what they want to do. Again, it's not to be offensive. They don't want to offend people. It's we have to be all inclusive. Unless your all inclusive point of view disagrees with ours or is contradictory to ours in some small form or facet. And so, again, that whole notion of collectivization comes up. This collective hive mind is what the left preaches. And it's also what Sharia law preaches. And so they are going to genuflect to try and make it to where anyone who would ask the sorts of questions that rightfully should be asked in response to these sorts of terrorist attacks will be ostracized and chastised and belittled by society so that they are seen as kooks or morons or people that just can't be trusted. And again, it's to make people shut down their logical capabilities, their logical faculties, and just to rawly emote, which leaves them to be susceptible to anyone who would engage in chicanery like this. And that has been their tried and true method and tactic and modus operandi for the past century and a half now, folks. And they're doubling down on it because they think it's effective, they see it working, and they are ever closer to achieving their goal, which is ultimately to tear this nation apart at the seams. But this whole notion of one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter and engaging in moral relativism like that, and basically having the disparate views equalize the justness or rightness of those competing factions may work for temporary diplomacy, but it ultimately fails where the tenets of the natural law are concerned. And again, this is why the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists want to eradicate any notion of natural law. It's because deep down it stands against them. It works against all that they are trying to foist upon us. And they can't have that because, as we've said, their ideology would be theft by any other name. But according to the New York Post, there's a 911 call which threatens to engage in more attacks or threatens that there will be more attacks. Folks, this is proof positive that our society of political correctness has emboldened these psychopaths. They are literally going out there and reveling in this. They are trying to spread that sense of terror. They are trying to discombobulate the American people, ultimately to weaken us, ultimately to pit us against one another so that we don't pay attention to the hard facts that are on the ground. And that is what they are so good at. It's to cause disillusionment. It is to cause this sort of disenfranchisement, and that allows them to move forward with their twisted machinations, which is ultimately to transform the United States of America away from being a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic into a collectivist dystopian nightmare. We shouldn't allow that to happen. We can ill afford to embrace that in the United States. It's so contradictory, completely contrary to all of our foundational principles, philosophies, and ideologies. And it's certainly not congruous with and incompatible with the natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of our Constitution and our Republic. And so they would rather embolden these psychopaths. And apparently, with respect to that 911 call, and they don't have recordings of it, just certain transcripts of it, at least at the Post, the unidentified male caller said, "I'm looking at the explosion, and there will be more." Now, folks, in my mind, that demonstrates that whoever this caller was, he knew that there were multiple explosive devices that had been set up. And he was flaunting it to our law enforcement officers and agencies. And meanwhile, the leadership's still going out there and saying, well, you know, there's no evidence of it being Islamofascist terrorism or international terrorism. It's just peachy keen sunshine and lollipops. That's how they're approaching it. What a disorganized drivel that has no connotation or connection with what's happening. Folks, we are at war. These people are at war with us. They want to annihilate us. And unless and until we begin to wake up to that reality, these attacks are going to continue unfettered. They are. And they know they're winning at this point, because clearly they're winning when we fail to identify who it is that's attacking us. But anyway, it demonstrates further that this was a chilling threat meant to spread terror and misery. And folks, there can be no peace and no negotiation with wicked souls who seek your complete and utter destruction. Our failure to realize this places us at significant risk. It would be suicide not to respond to these very real and clear and present threats. Yet, that's exactly how our leadership in this nation is responding to this. They're not taking it seriously. They're not taking the threat that we are clearly exposed to seriously at all. Instead, they'd rather just point the finger at us. In response to these sorts of attacks, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists always attempt to browbeat and shame us. That's been the predictable pattern that they always do. It's always that they are the blame America first crowd. And so they will try and project the horrific and monstrous attributes of these Islamofascist barbarians onto us, or try and do what Obama did in that, what I played in the last segment, and try and equate it or relate it to something where it doesn't apply. And that's the thing. They feel it's necessary to lecture us to be sensitive to the feelings of the practitioners of Islam. It's not concern about our citizens. It's not concern about the victims and their families and their loved ones. No, it's a collective approach again. That's what they do. They tell us to be sensitive. But why should we be sensitive to those who are attacking us and killing us in the name of that faith? Should we not be looking to hold someone accountable for it? Should we not be looking to place the blame where the blame is rightfully due? Isn't that what common sense would have us do? But again, we are not operating from a position of common sense, particularly with the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. They are peddling in sensationalism and yellow journalism, and they are doing what they can to try and obfuscate the truth because they don't want us to know the truth. They want to control the narrative because that means they are then granted unfettered power. And folks, that's really what it comes down to. Power and control. That is what they do. And you know, it's this type of absurdity that can only be considered a mental defect. I can't think of what else it would be, because it doesn't use logic. It's destructive. It's self-loathing. It really has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States of America. So here we are. We are exposing ourselves unnecessarily to increased risks of violence because we won't use common sense because it might offend somebody. That's stupid. That is absolutely stupid. It's insane. But it's where we are. And I don't see it improving at any time within the foreseeable future. But here's the deal. The left engages in a destructive and unfathomable self-loathing that will get more people killed. Recall that back in June, Attorney General Loretta Lynch said that they were going to edit out references to Islam from the 911 transcripts of the call with the Pulse nightclub shooter and self-avowed Islamofascist Omar Mateen. Folks, you can't deny that. And I've even got the soundbite of that, or relating to that. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull that up now just to jog our memories with respect to this. So here we go.
Meantime, though, the news keeps breaking this morning from Orlando. Here we go. The FBI set to release partial transcripts of the calls between the Orlando terrorist Omar Mateen and police during the massacre that killed 49. Attorney General Loretta Lynch confirming that only partial transcripts will go out, editing references to Islamic radicalism.
You know, as we have said earlier, he talked about his pledges of allegiance to a terrorist group. He talked about his motivations for why he was claiming at that time he was committing this horrific act. He talked about American policy in some ways. The reason why we're going to limit these transcripts is to avoid re-victimizing those who went through this horror.
Well, Peter Ducey's live in Orlando to explain all this. And
you know, folks, I gotta just interject there. How is that being compassionate? How is that basically preventing people from being re-victimized? That is a laughable excuse. And keep in mind, this was back in June. This was right after the Pulse gay nightclub shooting. And the first thing that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists and their Pravda there with the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media did is they wanted to run out and proclaim, oh, it must be a right or white wing, white races. He's going out there doing these bad things, I tell you what. Why? Why do they want to do that? Why do they want to prescribe that? Because, again, it ties in to their overarching political goal, their propagandistic narrative and agenda that is sickening. It's twisted. It is diametrically opposed to all of those things that we hold near and dear in this country. And it shows that they loathe and despise the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. Otherwise, they wouldn't engage in this sort of chicanery. Otherwise, they wouldn't be placing us in the amount of risk that they have been. But here we are. That is what they are doing. That is what they have done for the past century and a half now, folks. And they are doubling down on their efforts because they think, and in many ways they are, highly successful at what they're trying to do here, which is ultimately to destroy the societal fabric of these United States of America. I wish that weren't the case, but that is what they are doing. And there's no way to deny it. It's there if you're willing to look through the evidence to see it. But that's the thing. They're unwilling to connect the dots. They don't want to pay attention to that because it would undermine their agenda. And folks, that's what it comes down to. As I mentioned in the previous segment, it is about their agenda. Everything is about their agenda. They want to inject it into the facets of our daily lives so that it is all-consuming because, again, they are worshiping at the altar of the almighty and all-powerful, grandiose, and out-of-control state, meaning government. Government is their religion. Stateism is their religion. And they want to achieve it by engaging in a collectivist mentality, which is so drastically and diametrically opposed to everything that our founding fathers valued, to all of those natural law tenets and those traditions and institutions and our rights that they wanted to hand down to posterity. Because, again, when you look at the opening lines to the preamble to our shared United States Constitution, you find that it said that they meant to hand it down to posterity. We, the people, we are the sovereigns. We are the ones in our collective and individual capacity. You see, it's greater than the sum of its parts. And that's why we have so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence that what's so unique about America, or what really ties into American exceptionalism, what is exceptional about America, is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that ties into those natural law tenets. But we see that this fear of offending Islam or other insular and discrete minorities blinds us to the clear and present danger we face as a nation and a people. This is not where politics should be getting involved. This is not where your political agenda or positions should be front and center, because there's far too much at stake. Our national security, our vitality as a nation, indeed our very sovereignty hangs in the balance, and these people want to play this dilettantic game of politics. It's sickening. It's truly sickening. It's a grotesque display of identity politics. And it just does not work. Folks, we have to be honest with ourselves. There's a pattern here. It's been showing up over and over again, time and time again, and yet the advocates of political correctness want us to believe that Islam has nothing to do with these attacks. You know, that's like going into a hospital because you are purposefully eating something that you know you're allergic to, and then arguing with the physicians that are trying to save your life as you are going into anaphylactic shock, saying it's not the allergen that's causing it. No, it's not. I don't believe it. Can't be. It's got to be society. Society made me do it. That's kind of how they approach this. It's certainly the way that they try and make it into this collective hive. But again, and yes, that was a bit of a pun, wasn't it? Hives and food allergies. But you see, it's this deliberate unwillingness to acknowledge the truth, to see what it is, that really places us in a dangerous position. And that's what the advocates of political correctness want to do. They want to put us in danger. Yet those who carry out the attacks have no qualms about proclaiming that they're doing it in the name of Islam. And you know, folks, it'd be one thing if the left were consistent in applying their hair splitting, their little pedantic game of semantics here, but they're not. Recall the way they attempt to blame all gun owners for mass shootings. Then there was the attempt to ban the Southern Cross battle flag, or the Army, or, you know, the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia. And what they did is they tried to make sweeping, gross generalizations to say that all people who like that flag or own that flag have racist intentions at heart. But when it comes to Islamic terrorists, they want to tap dance around the issue. They point the finger at us, and that just essentially emboldens the terrorists by giving their message a modicum of credibility. Why? Why do we do that? Why is it that we are so convinced that the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to just go out on crusade against offensiveness, instead of applying logic and reality, instead of facing the facts that are before us? Well, it's because deep down, what they are hoping to achieve and what it is that they wish to see come to fruition in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours is destruction. They haven't thought about the consequences necessarily of what they're doing. They don't care. As long as they get to destroy, that's what they do. And they certainly aren't about constructing anything. There's nothing constructive about it other than maybe a collectivist hive mind, but I'm not so sure that I would consider that a constructive or good thing. It's malarkey. It's nonsense. It's something that is so destructive and so out of touch with reality that it threatens the very societal framework of these United States of America. And if we try and deny that, then we are closing our eyes to the truth. And we can't afford to do that either. We can't afford to play in the same game of delusion that they do. Yet, we know for a fact that they are being purposefully obtuse as to the real reasons behind Islamofascism, or fascism, and to the real motivations behind it. I know I mentioned this on yesterday's program, but it bears repeating again here. Failed presidential candidate and self-avowed socialist Vermont Senator Night-Face Boing Me Sanders, the flying saucer. I love sauce, Mad Dog 2020, I tell you what. Attempts to pin the motivations of terrorists on climate change. And again, it's so baffling that we need to hear it from his own lips, just as a great reminder of what it is. So here we go.
You said the greatest threat to national security was climate change. Do you still believe that?
Absolutely. In fact, climate change is directly related to the growth of terrorism. And if we do not get our act together and listen to what the scientists say, you're going to see countries all over the world. This is what the CIA says. They're going to be struggling over limited amounts of water, limited amounts of land to grow their crops. And you're going to see all kinds of international conflict. But of course, international terrorism is a major issue that we have got to address today.
Oh, right there. International terrorism. It can't be Islamic. And, you know, it's again, trying to apply moral relativism and political correctness, those cancerous doctrines, to it, to try and equate Islamofascist terrorism to, say, eco-terrorists. Why? Yes, they are both engaging in a dark and twisted machination, an ideology that is destructive and should have no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States of America, but it is an erroneous position to advocate for. It's a stupid argument, but that's what he does. He engages in this raw stupidity because it pushes his narrative and his agenda. And recall, that's what he does each and every time. It's always about pushing this narrative and this agenda, come hell or high water, irrespective of the detrimental and deleterious impact and consequences that it can have on the nation at large. But why? Why international terrorism? Oh, that way it's, well, it's not the same thing as, you know, here with Boing Me Sanders. It's not the same thing as terrorists that would take away my alcohol. It's not the same as the green pieces. It goes across international borders. It may go across international borders. And yes, you may be a nitwit pushing for a type of globalism that would be global communism and Marxism, but no, it's not just international terrorism. That's not what motivates it. That's not what drives it, and it damn sure isn't climate change. It is Islam. You know, they're not afraid to proclaim that they're doing it in the name of Islam. We're the ones that are refusing to acknowledge this, to our great detriment. It's insane. What we are doing is insanity. But what it really comes down to is that this is nothing short of semantics. This is why we've warned about this dark, twisted, and dangerous game of semantics that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been playing it with since our premiere episode. is because it really is dangerous. It really does shed the blood of innocent American citizens because they refuse to acknowledge, they refuse to properly name and associate the real progenitor of the threats to who does it. Why? Because again, they want the same type of thing. That's what it comes down to. That's why they obfuscate the truth. That's why they genuflect to try and make this dovetail into their philosophy. Because it's all about power, corruption, and control. But it's the deadly game of semantics that the left plays that causes it. And to my mind, they have blood on their hands because of it. You can't deny that this is what their twisted goals and machinations have brought about. You can't deny it if you're being intellectually genuine about these horrific attacks, these fundamentalist attitudes on the part of these Islamofascist barbarians, but they don't want to be intellectually genuine. They want to be intellectually disingenuous. And it plays out to our danger and detriment each and every time. Folks, there's no way around that. You can't candy coat that. You can't sugarcoat it. It is just the facts. And that's what we're dealing with here, the truth. Somebody has to. Folks, what our leadership is failing to realize is that with respect to these terrorists, what we're facing is a clash between two incompatible civilizations. This is one area where Marco Rubio got it right in the aftermath of the Paris terror attacks in November of 2015. And I've got the clip there, a soundbite of that I'm going to cue up right now just for purposes of jogging our memory. So here we go.
The attacks in Paris are a wake-up call to the fact that what we're involved in now is a civilizational conflict with radical Islam. This is not a geopolitical issue where they want to conquer territory and it's two countries fighting against each other. They literally want to overthrow our society and replace it with their radical Sunni Islamic view of the future. This is not a grievance-based conflict. This is a clash of civilizations. For they do not hate us because we have military assets in the Middle East. They hate us because of our values. They hate us because young girls here go to school. They hate us because women drive. They hate us because we have freedom of speech, because we have diversity in our religious beliefs. They hate us because we're a tolerant society. This is a clash of civilizations, and either they win or we win.
And, you know, for once, I agree with Marco Rubio with respect to that, because it is something that goes to the heart of the matter. It's not, as the specious claim goes, that it's because we're involved in the Middle East. That's what the isolationists want to proclaim. That's what they want us to believe, but it's not the truth. It's not how things are. It's their interpretation of it, and I think it's an erroneous or flawed interpretation of the facts on the ground. But that being said, folks, I find it hard to refer to the maniacal aspirations of these terrorists as a civilization. What it ultimately boils down to is a battle between freedom and submission. Recall that Islam means submission to the will of Allah in ancient Arabic. I know that I mentioned that yesterday and earlier in today's program, but it is important because it's on point. It goes directly to the heart of the matter of what it is that is threatening us. And it represents the foundation of their entire worldview, whereas the natural law tenets of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are ours. So in other words, the terrorists worship death. They are the ones that want to go and spread tyranny anarchy, despotism, and oppression above all else, because deep down, that is what their twisted machinations look for. And so they are the agent provocateurs of intolerance and hatred. And that is what Marco Rubio was pointing to. But it's not just the Sunni. There are Shia terrorists as well. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that we are facing these dangers that are out there. And when there is a power vacuum in the role of leadership and in global hegemony, because the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist banana republic leader of Barack Hussein Obama doesn't want to lead, that makes things even worse because it destabilizes everything. It threatens to put out of balance the true balance of power. And so, with the terrorists worshiping death, they thrive off of pain, and they loathe all that we stand for and represent. And folks, we would be derelict in our duty if we didn't come forth and acknowledge that this is a clear and present danger to the United States of America, our popular sovereigns, and everything that we value and adhere to. And that's just the hard, harsh reality that looks at us now, that faces us as we are reeling in the aftermath of these deliberate and intentional attacks against our civilization and our society. There's no way around that. Folks, what the caliphate wishes to do is to destroy any competing ideology to their own twisted view. It's that same type of collectivist approach where anything that sticks out must be destroyed. Recall that one of the adages from communist China is that the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, that they want uniformity of thought, uniformity of appearance, uniformity of wealth, uniformity of abilities. But that's not human nature. That is not the way that this imperfect world in which we live works. And so they are moving forth in this just incoherent approach to life that just is, it's intellectually disingenuous, and it is doomed to failure from the get-go. But with the tenets of political correctness and moral relativism blinding us to what is truly significant and to what is substantiated in these undeniable patterns, we unnecessarily expose ourselves to greater risk. Look, this idea of destroying any competition is what motivates these Islamofascist barbarians. That, in conjunction with sheer hatred. The bombing in New York is not an isolated incident, folks. Irrespective of the fact that New York City's communist mayor, Bill de Blasio, went out there and tried to say that it was an intentional incident, instead of referring to it as to what it actually is, he just fails to recognize that it's terrorism. It is terrorism. It is a direct affront on all Americans, just as 9/11 was an affront and an attack on all Americans. You see, there's the greater good. There is the community of popular sovereigns that has been for far too long now, ignored. Because the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. But when I say it's not an isolated incident, according to Super Mexican over there at the Wright Scoop, 5 pipe bombs were found at a New Jersey train station. Apparently, the pipe bombs were found in a backpack and had detonated when a bomb disposal robot was attempting to disarm them. Folks, recall that one of the things they had discovered yesterday in that Oceanside County, New Jersey town was that there had been a set of pipe bomb type devices left in a waste receptacle targeting a charity for the Marine Corps, the Semper Fi March or marathon, the run that they had. It's the same thing as the Boston Marathon terrorists. And certainly this cretin that carried this out used pressure cooker bombs in New York, just the same type and design that the Tsarnaev psychos used back in 2013. Folks, these people are not assimilating. They don't want to be a part of our culture and our society. They want to destroy and annihilate us. And unless and until we wake up to that reality, these things are just going to get worse. And so now we are facing a well-orchestrated attack against our nation and our customs. Yet we already know how the Obama regime is going to respond to this. They will continue to avoid placing blame where blame is due. Folks, there was also a mass stabbing in Minnesota, and ISIS claims credibility for it. Oh, but it's not Islamofascism. No, even though that's who's celebrating it and wanting to take credit. Folks, you just can't make this stuff up. There is no way that these multiple attacks aren't somehow and in some way interrelated. They are. It's just the way it is. Because when you look at it and when you approach it in a logical and an objective fashion, you cannot come to any other conclusion but the fact that this is centrally planned, or at least centrally encouraged, and has a common denominator with respect to what it is that they are hoping and seeking to achieve. According to the St. Cloud Times, after 8 people were stabbed, the police seemed stumped as to the motivations of the attacker. This despite the fact that he kept referencing Allah and then demanding that the victims answer whether they were Muslims before brutally attacking them. Folks, this is war. There's no denying that this is war. And they are the ones that recognize it's war. They are the ones that are fully willing to admit that they are on the warpath. And yet, for some reason, we continue to close our eyes to the truth. We continue to bow down to these twisted machinations of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists to our great detriment. And each and every time that we do so, it continues to play out in this charade. And I can think of no more of an apt description or term to apply to it, other than it is a charade, because they are sticking their heads in the sand as the world burns around them. It's almost like how Nero was fiddling while Rome burned. It wasn't that he cared about his population, it was that he was basking in his own self-interested glory, his vain glory. And I can think of hardly a more vainglorious group of people in this nation than the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists and their allies in the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and the historical revisionists who have infiltrated our institutions of education from coast to coast and border to border. They are literally marching down a path of willful blindness endangering the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. Because they don't care. They want a collective to exist, and that's all that matters. And so that's why the police, afraid to offend this pet group, this pet collective, don't want to attribute the actual motivating factors behind the attack to what it was. You know, I know it may seem repetitive to keep pointing to this unwillingness to place responsibility on those who are truly responsible for these barbaric attacks, but that's the repetitive response that government gives. They are giving these repetitive responses because they don't want to acknowledge the truth. They don't want to have their narrative challenged or shown to be flawed and inapplicable in real life. It would totally destroy their worldview. It would totally destroy how they apply everything. But what they're doing is intellectually disingenuous, and it's downright dangerous. It truly is downright dangerous. And folks, this repetitive cycle that they're going in is the clinical definition of insanity. Basically, they keep repeating the same process over and over again, expecting different outcomes. But the outcomes aren't going to be different other than in scale. Because in engaging in that, what they are doing is exposing us to greater attacks because they embolden those who loathe and despise us even more than the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists do. That's just the harsh and stark reality of it. So why do we subject ourselves to this? That is the nagging question that keeps repeating itself in my mind. It's stupid for us to keep allowing these people to get away with almost anything because we're afraid of offending somebody. I don't give a damn if I've offended somebody who is out to kill me or who gives aid and comfort to those who are out to kill me. And I damn sure am never going to support or associate myself with those who are trying to destroy the Constitution. This is what the problem is. That we are refusing to connect the dots and are allowing these people to dominate and control the narrative because we are so afraid of being offensive. That's why we have to declare war on political correctness. Because political correctness is enabling these sorts of draconian and barbaric attacks against our nation, our laws, but most importantly of all, against our citizens and people. And unless and until we are willing to be proactive in fighting this and not caring about offending these savages, these problems are going to continue at an exponential rate. But again, they do this because they believe we are in part responsible for creating the terrorists and that America is to blame for all of the world's ills. That's what they believe. They literally go out there every day and want to point the finger at the United States of America because in their mind, we are the root of all evil. We are the barbarians that went out and stole the land and oppressed people. And they use moral relativism and political correctness as their weapons to silence anyone and everyone who disagrees with them because, like the frothing at the mouth Islamofascists, They want a collective system. And they need to hammer down the nail that sticks up. Again, it is a tyranny of false unity. And we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are opposed to a tyranny of false unity, irrespective of what side of the political aisle it comes from, because it doesn't matter what its political affiliation is. It is detrimental. It is destructive. And ultimately, it will cause the death of innocent people, or the severe bodily harm and injury and maiming of innocent people. We cannot just close our eyes to this, because this is not a problem that will go away by ignoring it. I know that that is one of the default positions of government, is to try and just keep kicking the can down the road because they don't want to do the heavy lifting that's necessary to finally end the problems. No, that doesn't work for them. They'd rather just get high on the hog. And that's what they've been doing. That is literally what they have been doing, and it is killing us. It is that sort of corruption that alienates and disenfranchises huge swaths of the American electorate. And in so many ways, who can blame them for being disgusted with it all? Because clearly, the politicians aren't doing their job. And of course, what is their job? What is the job that's important? That is strictly adhering to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. That's what it comes down to, folks. And that's the problem. No one in the upper echelons of leadership of either of the two mainstay political parties are paying attention to that. They're not swearing allegiance to the Constitution. Yes, they pay lip service to it, but they're not abiding by it. They're not adhering to it. And that's what allows this sort of chaos to ensue. These stupid notions, these suicidal doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism. And it is a self-loathing. And it is a blame America first approach that they take. And there's even proof that the Islamofascist types support that too, because the so-called Council of American Islamic Relations Director, Hussam Alouche, has even stated as much in the aftermath of the San Bernardino terrorist shooting in December of 2015. Folks, I've got yet another soundbite that I'm going to pull up here because it ties directly into this, and it is something that just is unbelievable that it's what they do. And that they actually said it. If I can get the video to load, it is slowly loading, but he literally came out and tried to say that it was our policies that did this. Unbelievable. And here we go, folks. It finally loaded, so I'm going to go ahead and get that up for you here.
There is nothing about the situation in San Bernardino that makes it easy, not for investigators, not for the families of those who were lost and injured, and not for the Muslim community either, to be frank. Here in California and around the country, they're dealing with backlash after another attack by a so-called radicalized Muslim. You just heard the attorney for the killer say, the family say it doesn't make sense, that it doesn't make sense with his faith, it doesn't make sense with his behavior, and yet he is now representative of a great fear. Joining us now is Hussam Alouche. He is the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Los Angeles, and he's been close to the family throughout this ordeal. Hussam, thank you very much with us. You know what the concerns are, you know what the fears are, you know what this feeds into. What is the response of the community? We've heard from the attorneys for the family. We know that they are hurt for those who were hurt and taken, and they're hurt for who they lost as well. Absolutely. No matter what they did, it was their family. But Muslim may be radicalized. That means terrorist. That means here we go again. What is your response?
Quick things, obviously, being here at this place, just heavy on my heart. Again, expressing my condolences, my heartfelt condolences to the families, to the loved ones of all the injured, all the killed ones. It just, you know, we're all one at this point. You know, we don't look at the religion or the race of the victims. We're all Americans, we're all human beings, and my prayers go to those families and to all those victims. Now, dealing with the shooters themselves, I think it is important. Whether we find out, you know, the investigation is still going on. We don't know for a fact what motivated that horrific act. Now, if it turns out radicalization was an act, or was a reason behind it, I think we should be very careful not to link religion to it. You know, radicals come in all shapes and forms. Terrorists come in all shapes and forms. We shouldn't link a religion to it, because then we are validating what these terrorists try to do. They try to claim to be representing that religion. We don't call the shooters in Colorado Springs a Christian terrorist. They're terrorists. We don't call them. When the KKK commits crimes, we don't call them Christian terrorists.
I hear you. The investigators are making the same point about not being sure what the direct motivation is, but they're also pointing to radicalization. But here's the pushback. People will say, the bad guy in Colorado may well have been Christian. Maybe he was motivated by a preferred sense of his faith. But you don't hear Christians as often, at least, coming out and saying, I do this in the name of Christianity, the way we seem to experience it with Muslims. And that drives a phobia. What do you say?
Of course, but I mean, we have to put things in perspective. There are 1.6 billion, with a B, Muslims in the world. The number of people who join groups like ISIS, Daesh, you know, Al-Qaeda, is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that whole number. When we allow them to hijack the name Islam, when they commit their horrific acts,
Look, what it comes down to is he's using moral relativism to try and just appropriate these things. He's using moral relativism to try and say that what they're doing is right and is okay. And it's not related to Islam, but they are the ones that are calling it. And he did go on to say, and I'm sorry it didn't show up in the clip, it was not loading properly to the position that I wanted it to, that it was America's foreign policy that created it. Folks, this isn't based in reality. This is based in absurdity. They seek to blame us for the world's ills while ignoring the root causes. In so doing, it significantly weakens our stance in international affairs and undermines our national security at home. Those who refuse to admit the truth of what we're facing are the ones who are delusional. Caleb Howe at Red State lamented at the authorities' unwillingness to label this terrorism. Governor Cuomo called it terrorism, but didn't even want to reference the new PC phrase of international terrorism. But it is terrorism, and it is carried out by Islamofascists. Folks, there's no way around that. There is literally no way to get away from that. And then we see that a guest on CNN goes out and calls out de Blasio and others for refusing to refer to it as terrorism. I'm going to go ahead and cue that up. Hopefully we have a little bit of better luck with it, but here we go.
I'm wondering what elements need to be present to characterize it as terrorism? And what do you think of it at this point? Would you lean towards that or no?
I absolutely would. And the mayor made the comment that because no credible threats were received prior to these events, therefore it can't be terrorism, or they're not going to rule it terrorism. But when you have an act where an explosive device and then a secondary device that it didn't come from the store with masking tape and cell phones and wires wrapped around it, when you have a situation like that, somebody is deliberately trying to carry out these acts. And the fact that they actually injured so many people with one of the devices, it meets all of the hallmark definitions. And I've run 2 joint terrorism task forces. This was an act of terrorism, whether the mayor politically doesn't want to say it, maybe because he's going to be hosting the world when the United Nations opens up its fall session, I don't know. But for him to say because there weren't threats received, we didn't have threats in advance of the Orlando attack. We didn't have threats in advance of San Bernardino, but it was pretty clear pretty quickly that those were acts of terrorism. So I don't know what the mayor's waiting on, but law enforcement officials, I think, would pretty readily see that it is. Now, the fact that the police commissioner didn't say it, that depends on his relationship and position with the mayor. But this has all of the indications that it's a terrorist act because it was deliberate.
And it was. It was deliberate, and it was carried out by an Islamofascist. That's who they're seeking. That's why he's saying there's going to be more of this. And he's right to point to that. I mean, folks, this is why we're struggling to overcome the problem of terrorism. It's because our leaders don't even want to acknowledge it as a problem. I think that is why it's important for us to vote downstream in this election cycle. In order to keep our national security stance in place. I already feel that neither one of the main contenders for the White House have a decent national security footing or stance. And so we must shore up our concerns and our positions with the true representational branch of government, that being the legislature. You see, that is how we can bring this nation back from the brink of insanity. That is how this system was meant to work. And it's when we stray away from the powers that are clearly enumerated to the specific separate branches of government in the clear and concise language of the Constitution that we see government begin to break down and fail as it is here. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for tuning in to our program here. And I invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have either here at our YouTube page or our Google Plus page or our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle at RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's at RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my Twitter account, my personal Twitter account, and that of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, as well. And you will find the Blogspot account where we put up audio-only versions of this, our state-of-the-art radio program. And then there's the Cafe Press account, where we have all sorts of trinkets and goodies at reasonable prices, ranging from a wide array of things: watches, clocks, bath towels, maternity clothing, shot glasses, iPhone protectors, Android phone protectors, laptop sleeves, tote bags, either with our traditional logo or the first class passenger logo. Folks, we're also including that link in the description of this video, so go ahead and take a look at that. And by the way, if you have not subscribed, please do so. We enjoy having you here. We do these shows for you to empower you. And with that said, folks, we'll see you again next time. Do take care.